All right, let's see if I can articulate some of the stuff that I talked about earlier today. Essentially, the solution to all mental illnesses is truth. Practicing the truth muscle. And, it's dangerous to, go to the most difficult subject. The subject that is creating the downstream effect of most of our suffering in our lives. Most of us are going to have some kind of trauma that is going to dictate, all other areas of our life are going to, bow to this, to what we learned in some traumatic situation. So, to like put this into like a metaphor, like we had some trauma and what we learned was that only left turns are allowed. So, we go around trying to like do all the mathematics to get to our destination by only taking left turns, even though it's extremely inefficient. But, the danger is if we try to face that, and too soon before we're ready, we, may have some disillusion that sort of makes us shut down even further and, retreat because it's so frightening to face our terror that, we retreat further away from life and what, reminded us that we had to like look at this, too squarely before we were ready. So how do we overcome our trauma? Well, we need to, before we face it directly, we need to build our muscles. Essentially, what is a trauma? A trauma is where we learned something false, essentially, about ourselves, something negative that makes us come up with a survival strategy that is very inefficient. It's inefficient because it's ignoring the greater reality of our lives and it's ignoring our needs in some way. So there's a lie that was told, essentially. And how do we counter lies? Is we begin by practicing truth. So to overcome mental illness, we need to strengthen our muscles for truth. So, so instead of like going directly back to the situation that, traumatized you, and facing truth in that very literal sense, now you're like, some guy off the street and you have to fight Mike Tyson. The big lie is represented by Mike Tyson, and this feeble person comes off the street and you try to fight Mike Tyson. Well, guess what's going to happen is you're going to get your face beat into a bloody mess because you weren't ready for it, because your truth muscles, hadn't developed. And so to train your truth muscles, you need to practice truth in an area where it's less controversial, where you're not up against the prize fucking fighter of lies, that you've, trained. The other part of you is trained, is very well trained in its lies. And it's like this powerful fucking unstoppable, man that if you try to face him directly, he will beat the shit out of you. So to practice your truth muscles, one method is going to your senses. Okay, how is that practicing truth? Well, your senses aren't lying to you. By practicing going to your senses and quietly paying attention to your senses, you're able to find what's truth. And by practicing this, and what helps further that beyond that is reporting your sensations that you experience. So it's by going to your senses and describing what your experience is. And this way you're practicing being truthful. And this will become very important. Once you do decide to take down, Mike Tyson at some point, your truth muscle needs to be developed, because whatever lie he spews at you, you can't, shrink down from it and be like, oh shit, like now I'm going to, now I've been broken. I've been punched in the face with the lie that, made me cower like a child when, I was traumatized. So you need to have enough exposure to the truth and experience with correct discernment to be able to take on the deeper traumas, that will, that have assailed you for many years. So, you need to practice things that put you back into your body, back in touch with your natural, flow, with your natural ability to discern, what is not only what is agreed upon as correct, but what is your actual experience, not what is it agreed upon that it's correct, through the lens of other people, where we both see the same thing and we decide that, we both agree that we saw the same thing. Well, that's not truth. That's an agreement. So where does real truth come from? It comes from direct, perception of your own experience. And so, as I've described, one method is paying attention to the senses. Another is describing very accurately what is in those senses. Another way is to describe your environment in a detailed way. It may sound tedious, but the more you do this, you're practicing being in touch with reality. And so this is one of the reasons why talk therapy, helps, in a therapeutic, situation where you have a listener and, they're able to give you that feeling of being heard, essentially. And so the lies that you will tell yourself in private are going to be more difficult to say in public, because in your own head, you can get away with those lies. But, when you're speaking to someone who's just listening to you, you're going to hear your own lies more. So someone in talk therapy might come up, they might say something, they might be talking about their life, and then they come to a certain point, and then suddenly they pause and they're like, wait a minute, did I really say that? Do I really believe that? Oh shit, I believe that. Yeah, I believed that for so long. And so, what are you practicing? You're practicing your truth muscle, when you're speaking out loud. So speaking out loud in the presence of someone else helps you hear yourself more. So, when you're in the presence of somebody else and you're speaking out loud, you're hearing yourself more than you would if you're just in your internal dialogue and you come up with something and you're like, oh shit, you dodge it, and then you say, well, it's okay, this time it's okay. I'll just tell myself this little lie. It'll get me through the day, It's harder to do that. And, when you fully disclose, yourself, to somebody else, in that scenario, it becomes very glaring, obvious where you've lied to yourself. So, I think a lot of mental illnesses, essentially, they can be tackled by becoming more in touch with reality, and becoming more in touch with reality here is not getting a person who has, like, for example, if someone has schizophrenia and they're hearing voices and you argue against, you're like someone who's quote unquote normal and healthy, neurotypical, and you say, well, yeah, you're hearing voices, but those voices are hallucinations. So, and now you need to live in accordance to someone who's neurotypical and how they perceive reality in order to be considered mentally healthy. Well, that is an invalidation of the person who is hearing the voices. They're hearing real voices, and by challenging them rather than understanding, the nature of what they're dealing with, the reality of it. A lot of people will they don't understand what reality really is. Well, reality is what we experience, and reality is not an agreement between two people, But socially, we've been conditioned to believe that reality is an agreement. The more people agree on something, the more true it is. But that is not how we, as individuals, interpret reality. Because reality is what we experience. And so if we try to argue with someone directly, say, well, you're seeing an airplane, but I'm not seeing an airplane. So therefore you're crazy and you're mentally ill and you need to stop seeing airplanes. Well, how are you going to stop seeing airplanes when there's no airplane? You are seeing a fucking airplane. So that's your reality. So, what is less important is, what the person is experiencing themselves. It's how they feel about that experience that's important. So if you're not every schizophrenic person is, suicidal and unhappy. A schizophrenic person could also be a happy schizophrenic person. So what is the mental illness? Well, we say it's schizophrenia, but you can't solve schizophrenia. You can only make the schizophrenic person, either happier or less happy, And how do you get someone to be less happy? Well, you get them to disavow their own reality. And so this is what we do, to people. I'm using people with schizophrenia as an example because we all experience reality differently. Schizophrenia just happens to be a good example because it's on the extreme end of the spectrum, but we all experience reality differently. And so what we do as a society is we invalidate the individual's experience, and we say reality is, and if we can agree upon it or not. If we can't agree, then it's not real. So the problem is culture interferes with direct perception of reality. So it doesn't matter if lots of people agree on something, it may be completely false. So the common convention interferes with people's feeling of safety within themselves. Because how are we supposed to be safe in ourselves if we're trained that our senses are not to be trusted? And what it is to be trusted is if everyone in the room is saying one thing, but another thing is true, then we are supposed to defer to common conception rather than to what our real experience is. And this is where people become depressed, and want to, exit this world, because essentially their own survival is now in the hands of others, because they are not allowed to say, hey, I need a glass of water when I'm thirsty, essentially. Hey, I need, this, or I need that. They're not allowed to take care of their own needs. Their basic needs are now in the hands of common convention rather than their own self-referral and, practicing, their connection to their senses and their experiences and how to, do self-care. So unhappiness, it comes from being out of touch with reality, because reality, emotional reality, the flow of current, is never going to invalidate what your experience is. Whatever your experience is in this life is what you need to respond to. And just by acknowledging, the truth of your experience, that's where you will find fulfillment. That's where you will find happiness, is simply by acknowledging reality as it impacts on you, as your senses experiences it. And in doing so, you strengthen, the more you do this, the more you're able to confront difficult traumas, because Mike Tyson will throw a punch at you and you'll be ready with the truth to counter his lies. Now, he had big strong liar muscles, but now you have big, strong truth muscles. Just when the lie comes at you that you've been trained in your mind, you're able to say, hey, no, that is not how I feel about this. That is not what I want. That is not how I'm going to take care of myself. No, I'm not going to cower to these people who are trying to get me to believe this thing that is making me not want to live. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make me want to live, and that is being in touch with reality as I experience it, not as we agree upon reality. Agreement, it serves a function, but it doesn't. We need to not make our own, sense of self contingent upon the agreement of other people. Whoever it is that we are born to be, whatever it is that we're born to experience, that is the law. That is the God that you cannot, you can't put a drape over that. You can't escape that. That will kill you if you try to circumvent it. It will, sometimes it takes 50 years, sometimes it, takes 10 years. But if you don't reckon with that, the truth that you were born with, your experience, the truth of your experience, it will kill you, because that experience is what keeps us alive. That is, what we have to, each one of us, that is the cross that we must, carry up the mountain, our truth, and we must, and that's where we find our power. That is where we will find our power in relationships. That is where we find our boundaries. That is where we find our ability to take care of ourselves. That is where we find our motivation to continue living. That is, where we find our motivation to take care of our loved ones. That is where we find our motivation to take care of ourselves, our communities, our country. It all starts with acknowledging the truth that lives within inside of us, within our experience. And we can't defer truth to any organization or any other people. It doesn't matter how many, scientists, doctors, clergymen, politicians. None of these people have authority over you and your happiness. We all have to choose, happiness for ourselves. And what does that mean? It means being real with what you're experiencing and allowing yourself to acknowledge that experience. And as within that experience of what feels right, that you will find out what will make you happy in this life, what will make you thrilled to get up out of bed in the morning. It's not in cowering to some structure, some agreed upon reality by other people from, a bygone era. Every era is a bygone era by the time it impacts your nervous system. Your nervous system is right now. Right now is what you have to deal with. Anyhow, I think I'll leave it here.